Hello everybody on futureprimitive.org. This is a beautiful evening in Spain, late summer, early fall, and I am very, very fortunate and happy to be here with Elisabeth Sahtouris, evolution biologist, futurist, and by virtue of being a futurist, a pastist as well. And also with John Lash, historian and mythologer. Now, I would like to ask the first question, which relates to John's book, Not in His Image, published by Chelsea Green. And the question is about the Sophia mythos, which we have talked a lot about on this site. And I would like to ask Elisabeth what she feels about the Sophia mythos and if she has any issues with it.
I was very much impressed with John's book, first of all because of his very deep and detailed scholarship, and because I have long loved the name Sophia. I'm a Greek citizen. She is to me the queen of wisdom and obviously played a very big role in much ancient mythology, even in the Bible, where there's this long chapter on why men should heed Sophia. And it's a time in history when obviously the gender imbalance has discredited many of the ways in which women do things like economics. Women have traditionally done economics in order to feed everyone and give them all a safe place to sleep, and men have turned economics into a competitive money sport. So seeing someone revive the importance of this feminine archetype was very important to me, and also he relates it to deep ecology as we are seeing the Earth as alive through Jim Lovelock and Lynn Margulis's work, the Gaia hypothesis, Arnie Ness's deep ecology, and so forth. We are looking to nature to gain wisdom. And in fact, the ancient Greeks called science philos sophias, a lover of wisdom, and the whole point of science was to find guidance in human affairs. And when I heard that, I said, wow, that's exactly why I went into science and exactly what my scientific colleagues were never interested in. So it brought up many things, and during the conversation, I'm sure more will come up.
Well, I understood we had a fascinating conversation, sorry listeners, before we started to tape this, to record this. And one of the things I understood from the conversation is that is the Sophia mythos an allegory, or is it a true story for humanity? Would you respond to this, John?
Yes, when we were talking before recording here, Elisabeth brought up a consideration that I consider to be of prime importance regarding the reception of my book. As I've said before, I didn't, the Sophia mythos, as I call it, the sacred story of Sophia, the goddess of wisdom from the ancient mysteries, is sort of the centerpiece of my book. And as I've said several times, and I say in the book, I did not invent this story. I have restored it and recovered it from ancient sources. And yet, obviously, I would be trying to fool you if I said that I didn't believe deeply in this story. Obviously, I do embrace it and find profound truth in it, and possibly even survival knowledge and guidance for our species. So maybe I go a little bit over the top there in the way that I present the story, because I am such a passionate advocate of it that I may give the impression that I am presenting it as a cut and dried story to accept, as for instance some people accept the story of Genesis in the Bible. And you brought this point up, Elisabeth, and I value this very greatly because it gives me the opportunity to draw a distinction and to point out that I don't wish, even though I may give that impression, I absolutely do not wish to present the Sophia story as another religious dogma. I believe it is a profound religious narration. I believe it has the power of any religious or spiritual story that you can name. But I don't wish to present it as that, as take it or leave it. To me, it's much more of a teaching story. It has, as you observed earlier, tremendous allegorical value. You can take it all allegorically. You don't have to take it literally. But then on the other hand, if you want to use it as kind of a way to investigate the past and the cosmology of the earth, it may turn out to have some literal aspects. I personally believe, we were talking earlier about the initiate Plutarch, who lived in the early Christian centuries, and I pointed out that Plutarch, who was much closer to the source material than us, said that it was wrong to dismiss ancient myths, such as the Sophia story, as mere allegories. He said that they actually represented, in a poetical form, some things that really happened in the history of the earth and in the history of the evolution of our species. So I take Plutarch's view, and because I do so, I probably at times give the impression of being a kind of literalist when I'm actually not a literalist, you see. So I believe it's a great joy to talk with you about this, because I believe, as you know, that there is a biological and evolutionary wisdom in the Sophia story. And so to be able to talk to a biologist about it is, for me, an enormous privilege. And you're not just any biologist, so.
I think that maybe some of the heart of this question stands in the word poetic. And you, Elisabeth, have talked a lot about autopoiesis, and John talks about mythopoiesis, and I think that might be an important distinction here.
Actually, as John was talking, I was thinking that I got fairly literal about the ancient Greek Gaia myth when I first wrote my Earth Dance, Living Systems and Evolution book for children under a different name. And the Gaia story in Greek mythology is that she is a dancer swathed in white veils, whirling through space, and her body becomes the earth, very much like the Sophia myth. Exactly. Let's see, her sweat pools on the surface as the oceans, and she wraps the wind Uranos, the sky god, around herself for protection, and then the other creatures hatch from her earth egg, so to speak. And I pointed out that this sequence was exactly what scientists had discovered, that the white whirling form is the galaxy, and within that the earth forms, and the sweat is the lava that literally pours from her body, which separates into rock and water, which gives rise to the oceans, and the atmosphere that is formed by her first creatures, the bacteria, and also the gases from this magma. So interestingly, publishers rejected this because they said you cannot mix science and mythology in a book for children. It will confuse them. And I said, but I wasn't trying to mix it. I was showing how the ancients had foreseen the later scientific knowledge. So I do want to go back to your question of autopoiesis and mythopoiesis a little bit. Autopoiesis means literally self-creation, a self-writing poem, if you like. And I adopted that definition of life, which comes from Umberto Maturana and Francisco Varela, the Chilean biologist, and has been around now for a few decades. And I found it extraordinarily useful because we never had a core definition of life before. The old definitions had just given you a list of attributes which included things like growth and reproduction. So I like to tell people, if you don't have children in this life, you can still be alive, but a new definition which simply says a living entity continually creates itself in relation to its environment. And anyway, I want to give John a chance here to come back.
Speak about mythopoesis.
Well, first, I'd love to speak about mythopoesis briefly, but first I'd like to respond to the autopoiesis theme, because one thing that I have done as a scholar attempting to restore this ancient material is that I have claimed that some aspects of Gaia theory, including the notion of autopoiesis, are actually found in this ancient mythology of Sophia. And one of the reasons why I claim that is because when you look into the Nag Hammadi materials, which are written in Coptic, but based on supposedly Greek originals, you find a lot of Greek words. About 1 of every 4 or 5 words in the Coptic is actually a Greek word in a Coptic package, you know. And so you find the Greek word autogenes, which is very similar to autopoiesis.
Same thing.
It means self-generating, you know. And one of the remarkable experiences that I've had here, just to make a little diversion, because this may help readers understand my background. When I was in my early 20s, I started to read what is called the Tantra Shastra and the Hindu and Hindu writings, primarily Sanskrit writings, on ancient cosmology. And this is not so much the Vedic cosmology, but it's more like the Tantras and the Brahmanas and other certain Hindu Sanskrit writings. And at the same time, I was reading a lot about modern relativity theory and Albert Einstein and trying to get my mind around those concepts. And from my early 20s on, I had an uncanny experience, which was that the more I read into Einstein and into commentaries about Einstein, and the more I read into Tantra Shastra, the more I found the same thing. And I can remember distinctly, I must have been no more than, say, 25 or so, sitting over the works of Sir John Woodroffe, who was the great revivalist of these tantric teachings, in the depths of the night, reading this ancient Sanskrit cosmology and saying, but this is relativity theory. This is the general theory of relativity. All of the concepts are already here. And so I've had that experience quite early on in my life. And then in the last 15 or 20 years, as I started to really take a steep dive into the Gnostic materials, which are very cosmological, and to read, for instance, the Apocryphon of John, which is in the Nag Hammadi library and is an elaborate emanationist cosmology, as I call it, I got the same impression again. You know, only this time I was saying, but this is Gaia theory, this is not relativity theory. They are saying in these ancient texts the same thing that we are now saying in Gaia theory. So what's the point of all that? The point is not that I'm just a scholar pointing back 2,000 years and saying they knew it all before we did, because I don't consider that to be of any value. The point is the way that they knew it. That's the point. I believe that we today could gain something from them about the way that we know. That they knew by a deep participation in it. They understood autopoiesis or autogenes of the goddess Sophia because they participated in her life activity. And so to me, they are an inspiring model for us to create life sciences that are really alive. And that is why I'm trying to make this bridge between Gaia theory and Gnosticism. And as far as mythopoiesis is concerned, well, that's what mythopoiesis is. Mythopoiesis is the process of developing a language to describe reality. Gaia theory is mythopoetic. Your Earth Dance book is incredibly mythopoetic. Your description of how Gaia dances in the clouds is mythopoetic. But so is Brian Swim's universe story. That is mythopoetic. So we have, as human beings, the unique capacity to create these language systems. And the root of that language ability is mythopoiesis.
Elisabeth speaks very much and very beautifully about the fact that the universe is not mechanistic, that it is organic and alive. And I was thinking while you were speaking, John, about the fact that in order to be able to, and this is what Elisabeth wants to do, to bring about a bifurcation, a jump in science that would permit us to prove that the universe is organic and alive. Would this word participation, which is the word that John just mentioned about the Gnostics, would the notion of participation be important?
Yes, absolutely. I'm reminded of a time that I was sitting on a riverbank trailing toes in the water with Greg Cajete, Dr. Greg Cajete, who's a Santa Clara Pueblo Tewa Indian. And I asked him how he saw the difference between Western science, white man's science, and his red man's science. And he answered in the most elegant way. He said, white man goes into nature, takes a piece of it, takes it back to his laboratory to study it, isolating it from its context, because his goal is to control it. Red man goes into nature to study that same phenomenon in its context, because his goal is to integrate with it. And for me, science has, in its abstraction and measurement of things in nature, it has lost so much of the real world, because so much of the real world isn't measurable. Some of it originally, like touch, taste and smell, were considered woo-woo, new agey things a few centuries ago, because science hadn't figured out how to measure taste and smell. Once you measure it, it comes into science. So gradually science expands the aspects of reality it can talk about, but it still can't deal effectively with our dreams, with our minds, with our creativity, with all those things that are about purpose and intelligence, which Western science very deliberately excluded when it changed the Cartesian story of the a grand engineer god inventing machinery of nature to machinery of nature that comes about by accident because they had no more need for the hypothesis of God. So they threw out all intelligence and creativity, and then, having painted themselves into a corner, if there's no purpose, it had to be purposeless, meaning an accidental universe. So we have this very limited view of things, and the foundational beliefs of Western science are rarely talked about anymore. That's considered philosophy of science.
Right.
But the agreement was this is a non-living universe. Now, they've never proved that. That's a foundational assumption, and you don't have to prove those. And then they built their research on that kind of foundation. And if I say, I want to postulate that this is a living universe and build a science of research on that, they say, prove it. Well, you don't prove your fundamental assumptions. You say, what if the universe is alive? What kinds of things will we study? What kinds of answers will we look for? So that's, I'm trying to promote a real redoing of the foundations of science so that we can see whether we get a more internally consistent and coherent model of the universe if we take it to be alive.
John?
Yes, I really appreciated when I was reading the book that you did based on your conversations with Willis Harman, Biology Revision. One of the things that I loved about that book is the way that you do bring up the questions of, well, what are the foundations of science? And, you know, let's look at them critically. Let's just not shove them in our pockets and go down the road assuming that they are valid. And that's very mind-opening to do that, because only by putting those things in question are we going to create the mental space, you know, to grow into another understanding. I think participation is probably the key word that bridges myth and science.
Yes.
I think good science is based on participation, and good myths, true myths, lead to participation. I would really dearly hope, and this is my highest aspiration for my book, that in whatever way people receive the Sophia mythos, that it would lead them into a deeper participation in what you are proposing, in the totally organic and alive nature of the universe.
And I'd love to respond to that, because this brings up my autopoiesis is participatory because
That's
it's
right.
self-creating. Everything is within. We are part of the ecology. We are not humans with an environment that's a set of resources for
That's
us.
right.
The separation is what you deal with so beautifully in your book, because the other big theme of your book, of course, is that the Abrahamic religions are redemption religions that have an outside creator God
Exactly.
who creates nature and man and is the authority and in some cases even the puppeteer, and you have to know what he wants of you, and there's a sense that you are incomplete and inadequate, and that there's a big father there that you're answerable to, that you have to work to please him if you want to get to heaven and
That's
all
right.
that. And these, of course, are Judaism and Islam and Christianity,
That's right.
those three Abrahamic religions. Well, within the field of science, I coined the word allopoiesis to talk about mechanism, because mechanism is the dominant metaphor for nature in Western science. I had to be able to talk about it. And I realized that the logical difference between organism and mechanism, between an autopoietic entity and an allopoietic entity, is that there's this duality, this other created, this requirement for the intelligence outside nature to build that natural machinery, whereas within autopoiesis, the participatory version,
Is in there.
you don't separate the knower from the known.
That's right.
Or the doer from the action. And that's why I use the metaphor of improvisational dance, because dance is an art form in which you cannot separate the art from the dancer,
Exactly.
the creator. And the created are the same, the creator and the creation in an improvisational dance makes a good metaphor for that. So what you show so beautifully, John, is that this allopoietic religion, or science, you see,
Exactly,
it
or science, it's the
describes
same.
the mechanism that's made by the inventor. It also describes the Abrahamic religions that have the outside creator.
Mm-hmm.
So those religions have led us into the victim-abuser mode,
Mm-hmm.
which is the win-lose world.
Mm-hmm.
And they perpetuated, and boy, did you wake me up on the idea of turn the other cheek. In the best Jesus story, the good Jesus story that we have, the Sermon on the Mount,
Yeah.
which is only asking the victim to permit the abuser and is not addressing the question of the abuser itself.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the biological translation here is that even the ancient bacteria that had the world to themselves for half of Earth's life, a couple billion years, went through the kind of victim abuser, or what I call bacterial colonialism, exploitation of each other, and eventually seem to have somehow stumbled on the discovery of that feeding your enemy is economically more efficient than bumping them off. It costs more to kill your opponent than it does to make friends with them. And that's the big secret to why not only the ancient bacteria, who figured out cooperation and built the nucleated cell, the only other kind of cell ever to evolve on the planet,
That's right.
but then those cells, the big nucleated cells, went through the same process again of the victim-abuser mode, the hostile competition. Okay, and then they discover it and form multi-celled creatures. Now we big multi-celled creatures have to do global economics, a global economy in which all parts of it win, not the win-lose, not exploiting by the few, exploiting the many for the benefit of the few.
Mm-hmm.
And you can no more do that in a sustainable way, we now know, than you could run your body by having some of your organs exploit the rest for their benefit. Your body is the most highly evolved, cooperative piece of evolution you can imagine. You are the most evolved piece of evolution. You have 100 trillion cells all working in harmony, and each one of them is as complex as a large human city.
Mm-hmm.
We all carry this model of what's possible for humanity, and that's what inspires, thrills, and makes me a missionary.
Would you like to say anything more about the Gaia mythos and this subject? Because I'd like to jump to another question that fascinates me.
Just to add one more thing, that is, when we were talking before we recorded, Elisabeth said that in her understanding of the Gnostic mystery teaching of that myth, that the Sophia represents organism and the archons represent mechanism. Mm-hmm. And I think that is just a brilliant synthesis, and I think that would be extremely helpful to people who are trying to get their minds around that story, because it is a complex myth. And the wonderful thing about that, those terms, is that we can factor both of them in, because there are mechanistic aspects to our world and there are organic aspects. And our challenge seems to be to understand the both of them, obviously, but to own the fact that we are, as Elisabeth just said, somehow this wonder of organic cooperation. And if we have been made that way, then why can't we make a world that functions that way?
All right, so what I'd like to ask you both now is, how do you see the challenge of bringing consciousness? First of all, what do you both think consciousness is? Where is it? What is it about? And if indeed we have consciousness, how do we bring it to our ideas? How do we develop that within our ideas for evolution?
I remember when I was writing Biology Revision with Willis Harman, and he made the comment that if consciousness is anywhere, it must be everywhere. And I started thinking about how all human experience comes through our human consciousness. And it's amazing that science has been able to sweep this under the rug. The fact that everything science discovers is discovered within human consciousness. And that we're never out of it. And that it's always now. It's strange that science swept that under the rug. That even if you're thinking about the future, you know perfectly well that you're doing so now, or if you're reading about the past, that you're doing so now. So here we have some really rock-bottom aspects of human experience that Descartes didn't talk about when he said, I think, therefore I am. I think already implied I am, so he wasn't going very far with that one. What fascinates me is all of it coming through my consciousness, all of it coming in the now, always. And how do I build a scientific model that takes those things into account? So, obviously, Western science is an outer way of knowing. It takes stimuli that we get from our surround and works with those, whereas the Eastern sciences were based on going within to touch cosmic consciousness, to take our local consciousness and connect it, being aware of the connection within the whole, that we are autopoietic, that the universe is autopoietic. And Western science has tried to get everybody to agree to a model of a reality separate from us that isn't participatory. And we talked a lot about that in the writing of the biology book. So you're bringing us back to a participatory myth is a very important step.
Thank you. I think that you and I probably come, in some respect, from the same root there, because, as you know, in my book, I refer to the Asian metaphysics and the great Asian teachings, which I sometimes call the physics of consciousness, because I believe that in those Asian teachings and that deep, deep participatory mysticism of Asia, they understood the physics of our world in terms of consciousness, and likewise they understood our consciousness in terms of the physics of the world, the physics of nature. One of the things that I discovered when I was in these early studies of Tantra and the Hindu cosmology was that I remember reading this again in Sir John Woodruff, and I was just absolutely stunned when I read this. He said, well, Western science distinguishes, or has distinguished generally, between the primary and secondary qualities of nature. The primary qualities are like the objective things that can be measured: size, distance, time and space, mass. The secondary qualities are like intangible things, like what we acquire through our senses, the information of scent, the information of touch.
Qualities.
The qualities. They're the qualitative things that can't be measured so much. And Woodruff was saying that it appears that in these ancient teachings of cosmology, they make the same distinction between the primary and secondary aspects, but they say that it is through the secondary qualities that we really can understand how the universe was made.
They're the primaries.
They are the primaries. Yeah. And that the primary qualities are just mental constructs that we happen to be able to contrive and invent because we have minds that measure and weigh things. Yeah. But according to that system, what we measure and weigh is just kind of incidental information. Yeah. If you want the essential information of how this whole universe was created, go into your senses. Mm-hmm. Go deeply into your senses, and the information in your own senses will show you that. And I first encountered that concept in these tantric teachings, and it really gave me a direction in life. Mm-hmm. And now I can say, after many years, that I find that to be very, very true. And I find it to be verified in the writings and in the work that you're doing, and other people like David Abram are doing, that are taking us back to participation. And so my feeling about consciousness is that consciousness, we are an expression of a cosmic consciousness. Yes. But the paradox about that is that as we express our own expression, we tumble into that expression and we lose the primary connection with what we are an expression of.
Yes,
absolutely. One of the marvelous things that they say in Hindu Tantra is that the Supreme Consciousness veils itself, it hides itself, and then it unveils itself again.
And that's evolution by their definition.
And that is their definition of evolution. Mm-hmm. So I think that by going back to those sources, we're not evoking some kind of ancient wisdom that we've lost. I think we're really getting in touch with the only kind of wisdom that really counts, which is probably going to be survival wisdom at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm. See, this is exactly what my book with Willis Harman was about when he posed the question, what if we take consciousness to be the source of material evolution rather than the Western science perspective, which is that consciousness is a late emergent product of material evolution. So which comes first, matter or consciousness, is the question. And it's not a chicken and egg question.
No.
It isn't.
No.
Without consciousness, you can't have any evolution. And I think it's all a matter of this, what starts out as the undefined and limitless sea of consciousness, has to create some kind of a difference.
That's right.
A wave on the sea, or some dichotomy, so that it can start to create things, and then it has to step the energy down into electromagnetic energy and on into matter in the, what I call the low keys of the spectrum of vibrations that we now know this universe to be. So if you don't have the sea, if you don't have the energy that can step itself down into matter, you can't get matter. You can't start at the other end.
That's right.
Well, I want to ask you, in terms of cooperation and participation, how does the work and the research of Elisabeth Sahtouris and John Lash intertwine and participate and cooperate in order for this to mean something for humans? What does all this mean for humans? And I'll start with John this time.
Well, my answer to that is very simple. I think that the criterion of the value for any kind of knowledge that you would acquire, whether it be knowledge of music, of science, of myth, is that how it enables us to live more intensely and to be more humble and more compassionate in the way that we live. So for me, the value of science and the value of myth is really the same, in that it leads in that direction. It leads to the mystery of what this is, knowledge leads deeper into the mystery. And the mystery is absolutely endless. What Elisabeth was just describing, this stepping down of consciousness to produce materiality, we can know some things about it, but there is so much that we can never know about it. And yet we are that mystery. And so whatever puts us in touch with that mystery, I think, makes life a lot more interesting. So that would be my answer to a pretty difficult question.
I'm thinking about the mythopoesis of Western science, and of course it has a fundamental story that it has been teaching for hundreds of years now. And that story is, this is a meaningless, purposeless, accidental universe run down by entropy. And life is defined in that system as neg-entropy, the negative of a negative, struggling uphill against this entropic decline and losing the battle. So is it a surprise that we have a consumer culture, a get what you can while you can culture, that doesn't think deeply, that doesn't go into the mystery, when we're told there is no mystery and it's all running down, it's all going to pot. This is the most depressing creation story any culture on earth has ever thought of. And it's not just the physics. Biology then steps in and goes along with the game and says it's an endless struggle in scarcity. So get what you can while you can. So we have win-lose economics. We have victim-abuser psychology perpetuated by Western science. Now, the East, of course, the communist East, capitalist West, as we make the distinction, the West picked up the Darwinian story because he got it from Malthus, and it justified the exploitation of the rest of the world for Europeans because there wasn't enough to go around.
Precisely.
And the Soviets took up the Kropotkin story of cooperation in nature. I'm trying to show that the sequence is the same as a feisty adolescent growing into a cooperative mature adult. That's what we expect in society. And in the same way, the bacteria got it, the big cells got it in building multi-celled creatures. You go through that competitive phase in order to discover the advantages of cooperation. I mean, that's cold, calculated economic advantage. You can put it in those terms if you have to sell this to the world, which we do. But the point is that that is more efficient economics. So if we want to take our science seriously, why would we go with a science of agriculture, for instance, that's very high-tech but has to put 15 calories of energy in to get 1 calorie of food out, when the loving old family farm that never destroyed its ecosystem got 10 calories out for every one it put in? You see, if science really stood by its own principles, it would say, we better get rid of high-tech agriculture. We better get rid of hostile competition. We better go into the cooperative mode because that's scientifically justifiable. And so I'm saying, yeah, that's our future. Nature's done it again and again. We can do it. We can do it with love, with consciousness, within the mystery, and evolve ourselves. We could make paradise out of this beautiful planet. So that's my line.
Well, to close this interview, I would like to ask both of you, as human beings and as humanity in general, what can we do to become more conscious of the fact that we are autopoietic, in other words, that we create ourselves, and that we are mythopoietic in the sense that we tell our story, and that is what differentiates us from other species.
Tell a positive creation story instead of this depressing negative one. Discover with the best of the physicists that entropy is balanced by centropy, that radiation and gravity can be seen in a unification theory that shows that the universe isn't running down at all.
Totally.
And the same with evolution, put together the East and the West. You know, nature's profoundly conservative with the things that work well and radically creative with what doesn't. Why do we do these human either-ors when the both ends show us the way? So if we really get that, if we have a positive story to live by, and we know that we're wonderful, creative, autopoietic beings, then I say to young people, the bigger the crisis, the bigger the opportunity. Question everything. Question the debt money and see if there isn't gifting money instead. Question the way we do everything, the way we think about it in terms of moving out of hostile competition into cooperation. Create any kind of technology you want, providing you don't use toxins and you make it all fully recyclable. The hot age coming is going to give us the opportunity to move on as humans, and young people are not here to clean up our mess. They're here to create the world they really want, and all their instincts show me that they're ready for cooperation, want to do it, can do it, and will do it.
Well, that's beautifully seen. I'd just like to echo very briefly my complimentary idea to all that you just said. I would dare you to go out into the natural world if you can. Find some place where there is no little pollution, where it's quiet, where you hear the sounds of nature. Lay on a rock, lay under a tree, and I dare you to surrender, just for one instant, to the beauty of nature, to the absolute beauty that we are already in a paradise. And let it go inside you, and then see what kind of story that inspires.
In other words, go sing. Good night, everybody. Thank you so much. From the conversation is that is the Sophia mythos an allegory, or is it a true story for humanity? Would you respond to this, John?
Yes, when we were talking before recording here, Elisabeth brought up a consideration that I consider to be of prime importance regarding the reception of my book. As I've said before, I didn't, the Sophia mythos, as I call it, the sacred story of Sophia, the goddess of wisdom from the ancient mysteries, is sort of the centerpiece of my book. And as I've said several times, and I say in the book, I did not invent this story. I have restored it and recovered it from ancient sources. And yet, obviously, I would be trying to fool you if I said that I didn't believe deeply in this story. Obviously, I do embrace it and find profound truth in it, and possibly even survival knowledge and guidance for our species. So maybe I go a little bit over the top there in the way that I present the story, because I am such a passionate advocate of it that I may give the impression that I am presenting it as a cut and dried story to accept, as for instance some people accept the story of Genesis in the Bible. And you brought this point up, Elisabeth, and I value this very greatly, because it gives me the opportunity to draw a distinction and to point out that I don't...
chapter on why men should heed Sophia. And it's a time in history when obviously the gender imbalance has discredited many of the ways in which women do things like economics. Women have traditionally done economics in order to feed everyone and give them all a safe place to sleep, and men have turned economics into a competitive money sport. So seeing someone revive the importance of this feminine archetype was very important to me, and also he relates it to deep ecology as we are seeing the Earth as alive through Jim Lovelock and Lynn Margulis's work, the Gaia hypothesis, Arnie Ness's deep ecology, and so forth. We are looking to nature to gain wisdom. And in fact, the ancient Greeks called science philos sophias, lover of wisdom, and the whole point of science was to find guidance in human affairs. And when I heard that, I said, wow, that's exactly why I went into science, and exactly what my scientific colleagues were never interested in. So it brought up many things, and during the conversation I'm sure more will come up.
Well, I understood we had a fascinating conversation, sorry listeners, before we started to tape this, to record this. And one of the things I understood...
Wish, even though I may give that impression, I absolutely do not wish to present the Sophia story as another religious dogma. I believe it is a profound religious narration. I believe it has the power of any religious or spiritual story that you can name. But I don't wish to present it as that, as take it or leave it. To me, it's much more of a teaching story. It has, as you observed earlier, tremendous allegorical value. You can take it all allegorically. You don't have to take it literally. But then on the other hand, if you want to use it as kind of a way to investigate the past and the cosmology of the earth, it may turn out to have some literal aspects. I personally believe, we were talking earlier about the initiate Plutarch, who lived in the early Christian centuries, and I pointed out that Plutarch, who was much closer to the source material than us, said that it was wrong to dismiss ancient myths, such as the Sophia story, as mere allegories. He said that they actually represented, in a poetical form, some things that really happened in the history of the earth and in the history of the evolution of our species. So I take Plutarch's view, and because I do so, I probably at times give the impression of being a kind of literalist when I'm actually not a literalist, you see. So I believe it's a great joy to talk with you about this, because I believe, as you know, that there is a biological and evolutionary wisdom in the Sophia story. And so to be able to talk to a biologist about it is, for me, an enormous privilege. And you're not just any biologist, so...
I think that maybe some of the heart of this question stands in the word poetic. And you, Elisabeth, have talked a lot about autopoiesis, and John talks about mythopoiesis. And I think that might be an important distinction here.
Actually, as John was talking, I was thinking that I got fairly literal about the ancient Greek Gaia myth when I first wrote my Earth Dance, Living Systems and Evolution book for children under a different name. And the Gaia story in Greek mythology is that she is a dancer swathed in white veils, whirling through space, and her body becomes the earth, very much like the Sophia myth.
Exactly.
Let's see, her sweat pools on the surface as the oceans, and she wraps the wind Uranos, the sky god, around herself for protection, and then the other creatures hatch from her earth egg, so to speak. And I pointed out that this...
Hello everybody on futureprimitive.org. This is a beautiful evening in Spain, late summer, early fall, and I am very, very fortunate and happy to be here with Elisabeth Sahtouris, evolution biologist, futurist, and by virtue of being a futurist, a pastist as well. And also with John Lash, historian and mythologer. Now, I would like to ask the first question, which relates to John's book, Not in His Image, published by Chelsea Green. And the question is about the Sophia mythos, which we have talked a lot about on this site. And I would like to ask Elisabeth what she feels about the Sophia mythos and if she has any issues with it.
I was very much impressed with John's book, first of all because of his very deep and detailed scholarship, and because I have long loved the name Sophia. I'm a Greek citizen, She is to me the queen of wisdom, and obviously played a very big role in much ancient mythology, even in the Bible, where there this